Often the number of factors we need to deal with when making difficult decisions can leave us bogged down and feeling overwhelmed and helpless. What you need is a structured way of getting all the issues out there and a system for choosing the best options to pursue. The first step is to brainstorm the potential directions, very much like what we talked about in the problem-solving video. There are some techniques that come in very useful for exploring the potential decisions in detail, and also techniques for deciding which option to choose and assessing the impact of any decision. Firstly, some tools from Edward de Bono. The first of these is the 6 thinking hats. I won't go into detail about the process because it's copyrighted, and also it's covered very thoroughly in Edward de Bono's book called The 6 Thinking Hats. You establish the possibilities from 6 perspectives. For each perspective, you put on an imaginary hat that only allows you to think from that perspective. Here's a mind map made using the 6 thinking hats method. Here you see that we have white representing information needs and gaps, red where you put forward intuitive ideas without needing to justify them, black where you're judging ideas harshly and exercising caution, yellow is logical reasons why this will work, green is alternatives and proposals, and finally blue, which is the big picture. Next is PMI, where you consider a concept from the point of view of positive or plus aspects, negative or minus aspects, and interesting things about the proposal. This is a slight variation on the listing of advantages and disadvantages, which was propounded by Plato and then later Benjamin Franklin. One really useful way to use this is by creating a mind map where the first level branches are each person or group affected by the decision and their PMI reaction to the option you're considering. Put yourself in their shoes and imagine how they would feel about it, or survey them to find out for sure. Another thing that you can factor into the assessment is what's called force field analysis, where you put the proposed change in the middle of a mind map, and on the left you have the forces for change, and on the right you have the forces against change. Again, this is a variation on the advantages and disadvantages lists, but is specifically directed at the environment of the problem. So these techniques have allowed you to generate different options and explore the potential decisions thoroughly. So now it's time to actually make the decision. You are likely to find that the thorough exploration of the options makes the decision easy, but assuming it's a difficult problem, you'll still need to have tools to be able to choose the best option. Often you need to narrow down the list of options, and you can do this by using a variation of the Pareto Principle, which in this context means that about 80% of the benefits come from changes to 20% of the factors. This can be really helpful if you have a lot of options which could be implemented. To use this system, rank each of the options and choose the top 20% of the options and start implementing them. You can do this using the priority markers if you're using the Platinum edition of Novamind. Otherwise, you can just number or color code or arrange the branches to indicate the ranking. Say for instance you were trying to increase the sales of your products and you had listed a number of things that you could do to increase the number of leads, increase the conversion ratio, increase the average sale, increase the number of transactions, and increase the margins. So now you rank the options and start by implementing the top 20% of the items. It's likely that you will increase your sales 80% as much as if you had blindly implemented all of the options by doing this. Now, a refinement on this method is to also include a cost-benefit analysis in your assessment of the options. You can create a branch for the costs and another for the benefits. And if there are other things that you need to consider, like short-term and long-term impacts, things like risk factors, these can also be added into the assessment. In order to make it more objective, it can be useful to have things like the assessed probability of success as well, the overall benefits, the risk factors and preferences used as factors in a formula to give a better rating to each option. But what if you have a number of options that still look good and you need to choose one to implement? You need a technique for selecting the best option. To do this, start a new mind map with the decision you need to make in the title, and for each solution or option, create a first level branch. In this case, we have the options of advertising or starting an affiliate program. Now, in some cases, the result will be an outcome, and in some cases it'll be another decision that needs to be made. If the result of making a decision is that you need to make another decision, then add the options for that decision as child branches and continue until you get to every branch representing a decision that produces an outcome. In this case, we've got a decision as to whether to do advertising or start an affiliate program, and the decision to do advertising leads to another decision whether to do internet or print advertising. Now, for each possible outcome, add a child branch. In most cases, just 2 or 3 outcomes will do to indicate either the success or failure, or perhaps an optimistic, neutral, and pessimistic outcome. Now, for each of the possible outcomes, give it a value which makes sense within the domain. In the case of a monetary benefit, like increasing sales, it'll be dollars, but in other areas you might have to assign arbitrary values to the relative value of that outcome. Next, assign a probability to each of the possible outcomes, representing the likelihood of that outcome happening, so that the total adds up to 1.0. For each option, multiply the likelihood by the value, and add them all together at that level. This value is the value of making that decision. Now subtract the cost of implementing that decision and you're left with the beneficial value of that decision. To make the decision, you choose the largest benefit to implement. In this case, clearly creating an affiliate program is the best thing to do. Now this works really well if you have the factors reasonably well defined, but if there are complex and subjective elements to the decision, you'll need to use what is called a priority vector as a multiplier for each category. This is basically a way of weighting the factors that are more important in your decision. Now, to work out the priority vector, we need to briefly switch over to a spreadsheet and add a row and column for each category that you're assessing, and then for each square in the matrix, assign it a value according to these options. If 2 options are of equal importance, then you assign a value of 1. If one is somewhat more important or better, then you assign it a value of 3. If it's definitely more important or definitely better, then a value of 5. If it's much more important or better, then a value of 7. And if it really is very much more important or better, then a value of 9. And if it's less important, then you would use the reciprocal value. So, for instance, if it's definitely less important, you would use a value of 1/5. When something is compared to itself, it's the same, so the values are always 1. In our example, we have just 3 things that we're interested in: implementation speed, short-term impact, and long-term impact. In this case, we're saying that implementation speed is somewhat less important than short-term impact and much less important than long-term impact. Short-term impact is very much more important than long-term impact because we really want to make a buzz right now, and that's what we're focusing on. So now we add up each column and divide the values in each cell by the total for the column. So the totals for our columns are 11, 1.44 and 10.14. So we divide 1 by 11 for the first cell, 1/3 or 0.333 divided by 1.44, which equals 0.23, and so on. Now, for each row in the table, average the row to give a priority vector for that category. This gives us a standardized weighting for each factor. So in this case, the short-term impact is the most important aspect, so it makes up 62% of the decision. The long-term impact makes up 27% of the decision, and the implementation time is of less importance, with only 11% of the decision resting on that. Next, we do the same thing for each of the options we're considering, using exactly the same method, but this time we're comparing the options with each other as it relates to one of the weighting factors. So in this case, we have 3 options: internet advertising, print advertising, and starting an affiliate program. So firstly, we'll look at the relative values for implementation speed, like this. And we complete the table and transfer that information to the branches, so each branch gets the overall priority vector for that factor multiplied by the priority vector for that decision option. Once you've done that for all the branches, you add them up to give you an overall weighting for that option, and you multiply that by the beneficial value for the option to give a number representing the weighted value of that option. Now note that this is no longer a dollar value. Instead, it's just a value that you can compare to the other values. So when we look at the mind map, we can multiply the value of the options by the priority vector for that option, and we get revised values which represent the relative importance of the different benefits. Again, we take the item with the highest value as our option of choice, and now we see that because we said that the short-term impact of the solution was to us the most important thing, the internet advertising option is now the winner instead of the affiliate program, which would take longer to get up to speed. So we've gone right from simple decisions right through to giving you the top of the line tools for making very tough decisions that rely on both hard facts and more subjective factors. And when you use mind maps in this way, they become very powerful tools for visualizing the options and making fantastic decisions.